We see it in some individual lives, some of the transitions. Someone gets in a place where they look like everything's firing on all cylinders, then something disrupts their life, and there's wrestling that's going on. And what is, some changes that are happening? Scott talked about it. And we've said, as leaders, we saw that, we need to be more of a missional kind of a church that's reaching out into our community. And there's a restlessness, I know for me, because I know how important that is to be healthy as a body of Christ, to be out in that kind of community. And so there's that, God, what's going on? What are you trying to be able to tell us? So I felt those personal struggles. Some people talk about it, discouragement or frustration. And I know they use those words, and to be quite frankly, that's not what it is. It's a longing to want to be about what God wants, and to know and to believe with my heart what the sweet spot of being in the center of what God's will is, and knowing those things and seeing enough to know those things that are not, the rough edges of a diamond, the things that are not the best that they can be, and longing to see that. Not only for myself and the rest of the church, but each one of you as individuals, because the church is made up of people. And so when we look at that, there should be a discontent in every one of us in that regard of saying, God, what are you up to? How do we become more of what you've meant for us to be? I've seen it myself, through this process, and I know that this is probably where it comes in, this sense of my own wrestling with this and asking God, what is it? We've talked about, again, in the finances thing, we said, let's get rid of the building. That'll deal with our financial problem. But it won't, because I don't think that's it. I mean, when we were going to do that in September, God just moved in and had a landlord cut our rent in half. I mean, we've discussed it. We couldn't go anywhere and get close to the savings would be minimal unless we lived in our houses and met briefly in a school. It's just not it. And so, of course, then I look at myself and saying, and that's where part of it, where God worked in me, the restlessness, saying, God, maybe it's me. Maybe not me in the sense of the problem, which you guys might disagree with that, but me in the sense that maybe if my salary was out of here, dollar for dollar, that'd be the perfect answer to our financial problems, if that's what it was. But that isn't what it is. But that's kind of the restlessness that begins in that process. I recognize for myself the weekly preaching is kind of draining to me. The preparation of it, part of it is because I'm a perfectionist, although I don't totally agree with that, but I am. I just don't want to agree with it. But anyway, it's that process, because I am much more engaged. I love to sit down with people and say, hey, I'd rather sit with you at a Starbucks and say, let's read this and talk about what it means, than to stand up here kind of one way and say, here's what I think it says, and then you guys go do what you want with it. And so I understand that. I see that in me. I understand that my leadership, the way that I am, I'm much more, communal and connecting than just standing up and say, here's where we're going, people, let's go. Those are things that I learn, and those are the restlessness that God, puts in me to be able to say, okay, God, like wondering what does all this mean, like what Peter's saying. And as I said, every one of us has that. You have those moments in your life where you're in something, in a situation, and you understand, something doesn't feel right. And there's a restlessness that's going on, and you begin to wonder, what is this? What is God trying to show me? Maybe your life is starting to lose a sense of purpose or significance, and you're wondering, God, there's got to be more out there. Maybe it's a relationship that's losing, struggling and becoming difficult. Maybe it's a relationship that shouldn't be there, that becomes, was great at one time but isn't, and you're beginning to wonder, okay, what's happening? Something you had gave pleasure to you in the past, and all of a sudden it feels tasteless. All of these things are examples where God begins to work in us and create a spirit of disconnect that's kind of working inside to be able to get our attention, to begin to look of what God is up to. But understand this, discontent alone is not enough. Because anybody can create discontent. A society creates discontent. A sin creates discontent. All of it can kind of create it. And so it's just, okay, because I'm not happy, I hear this a lot. I'm not happy with you, and so I go somewhere else. Or whatever. That's not always the answer. And so when there's discontent, we want to be able to look deeper and say, okay, what's creating it? What's going on? Wrestling with it like Cornelius and Peter did, to say, okay, God, what are you? Where are you? And what are you saying? And so that kind of leads us then to kind of the second part of it that helps us understand from God. And that's that when it's a God-directed change, it reveals God's presence. We see God in it. If you go on and we read verse 19, going on from there, it says that while Peter was still thinking about the vision, a spirit said to him, Simon, 3 men are looking for you. So get up, go downstairs. Do not hesitate to go with them, for I have sent them. Peter went down and said to the men, I am the one you're looking for. Why have you come? The men replied, we have come from Cornelius the centurion. He is a righteous and God-fearing man who's respected by all the Jewish people. A holy angel told him to have you come to his house so that he could hear what you have to say. And then Peter invited the men into his house to be their guests. The next day, Peter started out with them, and some of the brothers from Joppa went along. And the following day, he arrived in Caesarea, and Cornelius was expecting them and had called together his relatives and close friends. And as Peter entered the house, Cornelius met him and fell at his feet in reverence. But Peter made him get up. Stand up, he said. I am only a man myself. Talking with him, Peter went inside and found a large gathering of people. And he said to them, you are well aware that it is against our law for a Jew to associate with a Gentile or visit him. Now here's an example where he's realized Peter is stepping out of his comfort zone into something that his law would say, you do not do this. But he's beginning to see God in this. He said, but God has shown me that I should not call any man impure or unclean. So when I was sent for, I came without raising any objection. May I ask why you sent me here? Cornelius answered, 4 days ago I was in my house praying at this hour at 3 p.m. Suddenly a man in shining clothes stood before me and said, Cornelius, God has heard your prayer and remembered you for your gifts to the poor. Send to Joppa for Simon, who is called Peter, and he is a guest in the house of Simon the tanner, who lives by the sea. So I sent for you immediately, and it was good of you to come. Now we are all here in the presence of God to listen to everything the Lord has commanded you to tell us. Do you see what's going on there? Here in this story, both of them have stepped out of their comfort zone of what they understood life to be about, the rules to live by, and the way that they were looking at it. And they stepped out because they both saw God in this. Peter says, he heard, they hear it, but he recognized that God has showed me. Peter gets it. He's beginning to see God has showed me the connection between that vision and Cornelius, who's considered by the Jews unclean. Cornelius himself knew it was God. We're here in God's presence. God has been all over this. This is a God thing. And he can't wait to hear what God is going to show us in this moment. People ask me, how do I know that what I talked to you about that week or even this week or as I meet with people, how do you know this is from God? And honestly, that's a good question. But my response is I don't know the master plan, so I can't give you the full answer of how I know. I can only say to you where I've seen him. And where I've seen him makes me respond in that regard in how to move. Just as it did in this story. When I see God's presence, it becomes God's guidance. It's as if God leads us by showing himself just the next step. And so we go there and we're standing here thinking, okay, now what? Where do we go? And then, there's God. And so you go over here and then, now I'm here. Okay, I see where I've come. Now what? And there's God. And you move over there and you just got to follow God's presence along the way. And as you follow him, it becomes clearer and clearer that this is God's will. And you begin to follow him along the way. And he does it by showing his presence. We've seen that throughout this, certainly this last year, and as I've said it already, we've seen God along the way. This last summer, us leaders did a retreat, and we spent a lot of time meeting weekly for months, asking God to show us what his will is. And we came out of that thing talking about we need to be missional, and we set up a couple projects, one with our youth and one with our homeless, and saying, okay, God, if we want us to be missional here, let's do this, and let's go this way and see what you do. And God has certainly blessed some of the efforts in that, but it wasn't like a takeoff moment, like a silver bullet, like, okay, this is what it is. But it was a step in the right direction. And so we knew going in as we examined, we saw, we're a church that cares. We're a church that preaches God work. We got a church that worships well. We see all of these things and we knew that, but we need to be a church that is missional. That's where we got to grow. And so we knew that going in. We saw that. God revealed that. And so it was a matter of how do we step in that direction and follow along the way. For me personally in that process, we spent these last few months looking at it. For me personally in that process, it was saying, okay, God, what about me? It starts with me in the sense that all of us should say that. You know, God, we can talk about Heartland, but it starts with me. Every one of us should ask that question. God, what about me? And for me, along that way, as I really looked into it, I recognized that my own personal strengths, that what I'm really is my sweet spot. When Lisa and I were called into ministry, it was about helping people, bring about healing. For me personally, you know, I feel a real call to be able to bring order to a chaotic life of people and myself. I mean, that's my thing. I like to organize some stuff. But people's lives, one of them, and helping them process that. I like speaking truth and looking at truth and discovering it together. I like blowing people away with acts of love and kindness and showing, encouraging, and strengthening. I'm less of a visit the hospital kind of guy, but I'm a more of a going out to a single mom's house and fixing their whatever kind of a guy. You know, and I see that. I recognize that in my own life that some of the joy is taken away because I was doing things that are not my sweet spot, if you will, and those become draining. And then because of that, I can't really focus on the things that I know would be energizing. And most recently, as Lisa and I are going through this, a couple of verses, you know, popped out. One for me, my biggest thing was, and it's always been, I'm a guy who says, God, I'll go wherever. I've said for weeks and years, and leaders heard me say, hey, I'll step aside. If there's someone better, God, go for it. And God has never showed that that's the case. And so my biggest thing is always, I just don't want to take a step that God is not in. And so a while back, it's been almost a month now probably, Lisa and I are saying, we got to figure out what God wants, and so let's do this. And so I stay up later, and Lisa gets up earlier sometimes, and so I do this thing where we never want to do it, but I said, okay, God, I'm just going to open the Bible, and you speak. I mean, it's like a roulette, Russian roulette. I mean, sometimes you got to do it 7 times before you finally see what you want, but first time. It only took the first time. And, and what was interesting about that story was it was Jeremiah 29:11, which most of you have it on a coffee mug. It was Jeremiah 29. I shouldn't say 11. 11 is the one for I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper, plans not to harm, plans to give you hope in the future. I go to Jeremiah 29, and the only thing I can think of, you're saying my life has got to be like the prophet Jeremiah? His life sucked. I mean that literally. Israel would not listen to him. No one really, they would just reject him all the time, and nothing worked. And his whole life was about just being obedient to God, and none of it was, he's thinking, none of it's working, God, but I'm being obedient to you. So I'm thinking, you're telling me my life is Jeremiah's? Thank you. And I'm reading through there and how Israel's screwing up all the time, and I'm relating that to you guys. And I'm thinking, he's told me I'm going to stay. And then I come to 29:11, and it caught me off guard. And God says, I have plans for you. And then if you read on from that, it's the one that says, if you seek me with all your heart, you will be found. I will be found. And God was just, to me, it was like God was saying, keep searching and keep seeking. I'm in this. Trust me. It's getting worked out. I'm not giving you answers, but trust me. Lisa wakes up in the morning, I get up after her, and she says, hey, I got to talk to you about a verse I had. She says, I know we don't like doing this, she says, but I took the Bible and I opened it up. First time. And hers is 1 Chronicles 17. I won't read through the whole thing. You can go look it up if you want. But it's the story of David sitting in his palace and thinking, I'm sitting in my palace and God's temple is a tent. We got to go out and build God's temple. And the prophet Nathan comes to David and says, God has told me you are not the one who's going to build God's temple. I'll make your name known and you'll be blessed among people and all of that. But he says, your son is going to build God's temple. So he called our son in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and told him what he's going to be doing, but he didn't appreciate it. But I will tell you, Lisa and I have talked about how Scott, we see him as a son. And so that was a second thought. We thought, wow, I wonder if God is thinking of Scott. And of course, I didn't want to put that on him because him and I joked about that in the past as well. But